go to a barbecue or you go to a function and someone says, hey, what do you do for a crust? And you say international education and they go, oh, is that like an exchange program? The general knowledge of international education in the community is beyond poor. Like, they just don't know it. They don't know that it's the third largest export sector. They don't know some of the key statistics.
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your co-host, I'm Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Garrigal in the east of Sydney. I'm the CEO of Global Society.
And g'day, I'm Dirk Mulder, CEO and founder of the Koala News, coming to you from Western Sydney on Darug country.
Another day, Dirk, another week, another year, I don't know. Time keeps going by, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Let's start off with some good news, mate. International Women's Day.
Yes, International Women's Day is this Saturday, a day for more broadly society to recognise the role of women within it and the successes that women have played over time. Tracy Harris, we've just released this morning. So for those listening, we're recording on Wednesday the 5th and this should go out on Friday the 7th. Tracy's just put together a story which I know that she's worked really hard on, probably for the last 2 weeks. She's been out contacting a whole bunch of leading ladies across our sector and she's profiled 10. So I'll just quickly run through them. Rama Mashood from the University of South Australia, Joanna Kelly from Economies Australasia, Melissa Banks, who needs no further introduction, but who's currently at the Lygon Group, Sasha Hampson from Pearson, Dom Harden, from La Trobe College, Darren Belford from Study Perth, Tracy O'Halloran from AEAS, Yana Pereira from Stratify, Sarah Todd, who's recently left Griffith and who currently holds multiple board and advisory roles, and someone who we both know really well, Anna Kirkham from the University of Sydney. It's a really great piece, mate. It's, I think Trace did one last year on the same topic and profiled a different group of women who have made massive contributions to our sector. And I think it's a point in time where you can kind of sit back and pause and read some of the backstories, and not just the backstories, but go, peel back the contact paper on some of the experiences that these ladies have had as they've kind of come into the sector in their junior careers, how they've moved through it, who's influenced them, some of their aspirations are. So Trace asked 3 questions of each of those ladies. So what inspired you to pursue a career in international education and what keeps you motivated? Who has been a role model or mentor for you and what did you learn from them? And what's one lesson from your career that you wish you had known earlier? So again, a great framework that Trace has presented there to be able to get the best out of these ladies and to be able to tell their stories and hopefully inspire, if I can say, not just ladies to do better or to contribute more or to encourage, but right across the gender spectrum. I think these are stories that we all can really engage with and they're amazing.
I'm very grateful for Tracy because she's actually added a whole bunch of extra people for my guest list for the podcast without having to do too much thinking on my part. Interesting, a number of these ladies have already been on the podcast. Melissa Banks got an episode with Sarah Todd coming up. I think it's coming out in another week or two. And Darren Belford, also, I almost spoke in French there for some reason. I don't know why. I was just going to say aussi. There we go, as well. Darren Belford is on the podcast in a few weeks' time as well. So if you're looking to dive deeper onto some of those stories after you read Tracy's article by the time this podcast comes out, then tune into Global Horizons because we've got sort of some long-form conversations with them too. Yeah, awesome. Amazing people in the industry. We're so lucky to work with the legends that we do.
We sure are.
Mate, anything from your perspective that stood out from that story? Any quotes?
Oh, mate, look, they're all fascinating background stories, but the one that kind of stands out takes me back to when we were in Melbourne and we had a bit of a longer form chat and you asked me a similar question. But Melissa Banks actually said, something along the lines of, I'm particularly grateful of my younger self for having a go at anything, from being on project teams, establishing foreign campuses, pathway colleges, to designing scholarship programs and joining graduation ceremonies. And to me, that it kind of really hit home because that's kind of, I feel like that's really in my wheelhouse of advice, is just to have a go at everything. And I think, encouraging people to do that is really, really important. So certainly identify with that quote from Melissa Banks.
Yeah, awesome. There's so much wisdom in her podcast. And she was, of course, coming back into the Lygon Group after taking a bit of time out. And it's just a great story. So if you haven't heard that episode with Melissa Banks, you can find it in season 2 of Global Horizons. So moving on, you've got a great op-ed piece from Scott Bowman. Scott Bowman's, of course, the Vice-Chancellor up at Charles Darwin University. Bit of a legendary leader in higher ed circles. Came from CQU, I want to say. Before that, am I right there?
Yeah, so originally from the UK, I believe he did his PhD at the Open University. So he's got certainly a man of the people, if I can put it that way, and certainly wears that on his sleeve quite well. Like you say, came to Australia. I certainly knew him I think when he first started at James Cook University. I think prior to that he was at UniSA for a little bit. Yeah, like you say, Central Queensland University or CQU Australia, and now either spent a little bit of time at Western Sydney as Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and now back in the big chair at Charles Darwin University.
Awesome. So tell us about this opinion piece.
So Scott puts out a weekly email, which I'm fortunate to be on the distribution list of, and it's called the Friday Musings. And every now and then, and he's quite candid, which I think most folks appreciate about his thoughts and about where, the things that he's working on, where the university's sitting in different parameters or in different aspects of the university's governance. And I picked up on it. So I've known Scott for a number of years. So I wrote to him and said, this is really fascinating. This area that he talks about, the intersection, I guess, of decreasing international students or, restrictions on allocations, but then university obligations. So he put all that together. He was very gracious and put a bit of time into it. So I do thank Scott for that. Basically sets up the picture that essentially, some time back, the University Council there made the decision to open up a city campus, which obviously requires, I guess, significant funding to do that. Quite clearly, the university and the Northern Territory more generally has an aspiration to have 10,000 international students with the capping or with the allocation. I shouldn't say capping because it's not capping. With the allocations that have been presented, that severely restricted that. So Scott kind of makes the point that it's a little bit kind of silly on one hand that the government's, given them this loan for the city campus, which is based on 8,500 students, I believe, around that. But then, on the right hand, but then on the left hand, kind of restricting their enrolment capacity through the international space to 4,000. So, and he's quite candid and saying this has left a massive hole in our budget. So again, Northern Territory, a very unique proposition. And I think Scott's in a really strong position to be able to argue the case that the Northern Territory is growing. It has labour shortages. It has aspirations to grow, and international students are a key part of that.
Are you surprised? I mean, a government that gives you this on one hand and then basically shoots himself in the foot on the other hand. I don't know.
There was another example of that I came across through kind of the Senate hearings where there was, I can't remember, was it Holmes maybe? Had this amazing grant from the government to build, I can't remember what it was. It was, I think, maybe a media facility or something like that. And it was going to, entertain or output research and the whole 9 yards. And then they've been cut back to bare bone. And, essentially this grant that they've been given from the government to build this amazing facility will either never be used or will certainly be underutilized. So again, it's one of those things where, in a large federal government, one hand may not necessarily be aligned to the other. So it's interesting. Scott goes on to say that, he is confident. So I'll actually read this paragraph because I think it's a really important one. We're lobbying the federal government to increase our limit for international students. This makes sense for the NT. We've had massive labour and skill shortages. Both CDU and the Northern Territory want more international students. It makes no sense for the government to sign off a loan based on 8,500 students and then limit us to 4,000. I certainly hope sense will prevail and we will be granted our allocation increase. So maybe, I don't know, maybe if you read the tea leaves on that, maybe he's having some success in Canberra arguing this case, and that potentially, as we've said before, that, one scenario is post this election, that the migration rhetoric dies down a little bit and we return to a scenario which is somewhat more normal than what we've probably seen in the last 18 months.
Absolutely. That's the hope. Since we're on nonsensical government policy, shall we jump across very quickly to the USA, where recent news out of Washington, as announced by NAFSA, around study abroad funding. Shall I deal with this one?
Yeah, please, mate, do.
So in mid-February, as part of this kind of manic action that is happening over in the USA in terms of government departments just having their budgets shredded, people being laid off, employment paused and all of that. In fact, something that I hadn't picked up on was that the federal government in the States had paused on the 13th of February funding from the State Department to US grant recipients, including Fulbright, the Gilman grants, which go to study abroad students, and a whole bunch of other funding initiatives, essentially leaving students, current and future grant recipients, without money. Dirk, this was huge news that somehow just, I don't know, I completely missed it. Initially, it was a 15-day freeze on funding. However, that freeze is supposed to have expired and no funding is forthcoming. In fact, the State Department hasn't had very much to say about it. And so NAFSA has come out very strongly, pointing out quite rightly that there are thousands and thousands of students all around the world who are reliant on US government funding, who are essentially going without. This seems like a crazy situation, Dirk.
Mate, it does. I mean, the language used in the statement, I think, is, goes to the heart of it. It's not just current students. Like, could you imagine being broad and then suddenly having grant monies, which, you depend on to do these things, being frozen. But the language I find really interesting, which was a statement from Fanta Orr, the executive director there, the freeze on State Department grant programs threatens the survival of study abroad and international exchange programs. I mean, we're talking like this is huge. The US students don't necessarily contribute to global mobility in the same way that the rest of the world does in terms of full degree programs. Their participation in short-term programs, be that either semester programs or shorter island programs, is massive. I mean, massive. Certainly here in Australia, we receive our fair share, but right across Europe, if you think about the UK, Italy and Spain particularly, just incredible. So, I mean, I heard the word on a TV show or on a podcast the other day about isolationism from the US, and it didn't work well after World War I. And some would argue that led into what happened in the 30s and the 40s. We're certainly looking at a recalibration of the way the US sees itself under this administration in terms of its role in the world. And these outreach programs are certainly in a target area. Let's hope some common sense prevails. I think an outwardly looking supportive US across the globe is a good thing. And having US students experience the world the way that they have been over the last 20 or 30 years through mobility programs is a good thing. Again, they don't participate in mobility, generally don't have gap years like we would have in terms of, when we finish our studies or we say for a couple of years afterwards, we go and work in Whistler or we go to the UK, and the Yanks just don't seem to do that. So where is the opportunity in their career cycle, if I can put it that way? And I say career cycle from, middle teens to late teens, all the way through to generally retirement, which is where you start seeing the grey nomads experience the world a little bit more. Where's the opportunity for, the vast majority of US citizens to be able to experience the globe and be able to understand that there's a bigger world out there? That's, I guess, what's on the table at the moment. And it's quite scary to think that the administration either doesn't value that or is not prioritising that.
I would just call it outright bonkers. This is just absolute ridiculous, bonkers, crazy crap kind of policy. Just once again being made absolutely on the fly. And we are talking about literally hundreds of thousands of students out of the US take part on study abroad programs every year. And look, from our perspective here in Australia, there are a number of huge inbound study abroad programs here in Australia. No doubt a percentage of those students will be impacted here. And if you look at the announcement, it's not just current students. So we may have students literally studying right now on our campuses whose funding has essentially evaporated, but also future students. And I think we've seen, certainly with the whole international caps debacle here in Australia, this has that kind of long-term effect. The uncertainty it creates has a long-term effect, not only our Australian institutions, but I'm sure there are a lot of organisations around the world that operate in the study abroad space who would be looking at that very nervously, saying, even if it's restored now, the funding that is, any kind of uncertainty has real human impact, become uncertain, and then might decide to not go do that, which is a pity. So since we're on governments and politics and stupidity, I think it's election season coming up. At time of recording, hovering off the Queensland coast is one Cyclone Alfred. Isn't that crazy, mate? Like, this cyclone that's basically spun the whole way down the east coast and has decided to take a right-hand turn into peak hour traffic in Brisbane. Yeah, just that's basically going to shut down Brisbane, I'd say, for a few days. But there is speculation. Sorry, wait for it. You're probably wondering, like, how the hell has he gone from, like, politics to cyclone? It was connected.
I'm over-rendering. I'm looking forward to the connection, though.
It was connected in my brain. I read a piece of an article in the paper this morning that was saying that Albanese apparently is very ready to call an election, but doesn't want to do so just as Cyclone Alfred goes crashing into the South Bank swimming pool. So that was my connection with the Australian election. But let's say that an election announcement appears to be imminent, and it seems like IEAA is trying to get on the front foot by getting its message out there. Do you want to talk through the statement that's come out from IEAA? I thought it was a very nice paper, very nice policy position.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mate, you're absolutely right. Everything that I heard was that the Prime Minister was going to visit the Governor-General on Sunday, and there doesn't seem to be anyone that I've spoken to that understands why he would delay this. certainly doesn't want to move into another budget round, is what I'm hearing, which is the case if he leaves it too late. So you're absolutely right. The cyclone makes sense if that's the case. Yeah, look, IEAA, I should say, are the latest, because a number of organisations have released policy position papers or election platforms or documents of such to say this is what we think issues around international education should be looked at in the context of the election. So UA put one out late last year. ITECA put one out even earlier. English Australia have come out with a whole bunch of things more around the Senate kind of hearings, but I'm pretty sure that, a lot of that could be used around the election as well. And as you say, IEA brought one out this week. Mate, yeah, like you say, it's a really, really good paper. Essentially, there are three kind of themes to it. So the first one is integrity and good governance. The second is economic development and skills integration. And the third is soft power diplomacy and community integration. Across the three, there are 18, focal points or 18 key areas for the government to look at. So no surprise that the first one is review and launch a new national strategy for international education. That's a big bit of work, but I think it's an absolute necessity to ensure that there's consistency and continuity out there in the marketplace, because that's the thing that I think we now lack most right across everything. So yeah, a great policy position paper. I am working on a piece at the moment. So when the Prime Minister does drive up the drive and calls the election, I'll release that. And it's going to be like an advocacy piece for Joe Public or, Joe Academic or Joe Professional Services person in international education. It's going to cite a lot of these pieces to say, hey, this is what's out there, but really talk a little bit about, what can we be doing as minnows, essentially, to be hammering home that international education is important. So, first and foremost, you've got to talk to your candidates. No doubt, those of you that catch public transport, you'll be seeing politicians at the moment standing in front of train stations. They're probably out in supermarkets or shopping centres at the moment, handing out posters. I mean, the informal campaigning has begun. So the first and foremost is stop and talk to them. Actually tell them what the heck are you doing with international education. And there's going to be a bunch of key messages, some statistics and whatnot that you can use. So that's going to be really important. So the second is around a thing that was coined by Sally Gatenby, who we've had on this podcast before, and Andrew Teese from IEAA at a session last year at AIEC, and it's called Barbecue Conversations. And it's something that we've spoken about before. It's something that I am tremendously on board with, because I think from my own personal experiences, and I've said this before, you go to a barbecue or you go to a function and someone says, hey, what do you do for a crust? And you say international education, and they go, oh, is that like an exchange program? The general knowledge of international education in the community is beyond poor. Like, they just don't know it. They don't know that it's the third largest export sector. They don't know some of the key statistics. They've probably absorbed some of the things that happen on Sky News and other, kind of broader media outlets where international students take our jobs and they take our houses. All incorrect. And again, talk to family, talk to your friends, and make sure that you essentially propagate these messages with everyone that you talk to. There's supposedly 250,000 of us that work in this sector, and if we all talk to 4 or 5 people, we're going to make an impact on the general community, and I think that's really, really important. The third point is that media outlets are now going to be starting to run campaigns themselves. So this will happen across a whole bunch of media outlets. The first one that I saw come up the other day was the ABC, and I think it's something like have your say, or what do you think? Stop, pause, take 5 minutes, fill out the survey, and talk about international education. If you can get it on these guys' radars that international education is important, it's an important employer of people in this country, it's an important economic contributor, and it's an important soft diplomacy point, then I think we're going to have some really good leg room. So again, advocacy in line with the IEAA's election platform is going to be so important over the next, dare I say, possibly 2 months, 6 weeks to 2 months, I would imagine. So yeah, a really, really important piece, and congratulations to the IEAA for putting this out.
Yeah, awesome. Just as you were talking there, mate, it sort of occurred to me that there's almost like a branding issue with us talking about our industry as international education. I mean, of course that is what it is, but it doesn't really explain what it does. And, you've got a substantial number of people who hear international or foreign or something like that, and they kind of get nervous. Whereas what our industry is doing is filling skills gaps and things like that. I just wonder if there's not a branding issue that needs to be addressed here as international educators, but calling ourselves, yeah.
Nothing we've done in the past has worked, has it? It just hasn't cut through. So we do need to think about this differently. We do need some fresh ideas to the conversation. What is it? What are the obstacles that we need to overcome? How do we overcome them? And what's the best way to present what we do in a welcoming way? I couldn't agree more. Skills gaps are so important.
Just makes me think, I've been flooded recently by ads from, I can't remember if it's BHP or Fortescue, one of these, talking about copper and how copper is needed for the energy transition for us to, transition to green energy. And obviously what they're trying to do is just a branding exercise to make us stop thinking about mining as holes in the ground, destroying the environment, as mining is supporting the environment, which to some extent there's some truth in that, right? But it's just trying to shape the narrative around that. And I think, once again, thinking about that 250,000 odd people who are attached to international education in some way, if we just had a punchier way to describe it, maybe that would actually start to have some impact. Anyway, that's just Rob's brain drifting off into the blue sky on a Wednesday morning as we're recording. Should we finish up talking about maybe heading back into the study abroad space? Published a piece from Brad Doherty during the week around financial barriers for learning abroad.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This comes up every now and then, and off the back of the clear demonstration that study abroad needs to be financially supported in some way through the US example. We're not adverse to it here in Australia either. So, but one of the things that I really find interesting is, I put my hand up and say I'm probably in this group when I think about study abroad, and you might be the same, Rob, I don't know, but the students that we dealt with 10 years ago were a different generation. So now fast forward 10 years, and where are we at with supporting the needs of these students? Now, I certainly remember when I was in university land, one of the things that we did, quite actively was saw the shift from, students interacting with us in a student centre to wanting to interact with us at 6:00 at night from their iPad or their laptop computer. So you've got to change the way you do things to meet the service level requirements or to be able to successfully engage with students. And I think that's happening again now in different ways. So Brad speaks a little bit about this from a Gen Z perspective. So the first one, which is a really interesting point, and I've never thought about this. 61%, Brad says, of Australian universities report that their learning abroad staff have held their roles for over a decade. Now, that's not a bad thing, right? Like, that's a great thing. That's to say that we've got, a lot of staff in a lot of our institutions that are really across learning abroad. They've got deep experience, and it's great. However, in the context of that changing student, are we adapting and are we nimbly enough? Is that even a word? Are we innovating at the same pace that we would have if we had a different staff profile? And I think it's a really good point to make. I guess that's the first one. The other one was one key insight challenging traditional perspectives is that only 17% of most universities are from a low socioeconomic background. That startled me. I would have thought that would have been a lot higher. So that was Innovative Research University's research from 2023. So only less than 1 in 5 are genuinely low socioeconomic. So that then puts into another perspective. How do you then financially incentivize learning abroad if we're not talking about a larger cohort that is low socioeconomic? And what does that mean? Does it mean they're not low socioeconomic because they have part-time jobs, but they can't leave them to study abroad? That, I guess, when you peel the contact paper back on that, it creates a whole other series of questions. So I think this piece I don't think there's any silver bullets that come out of it, but it raises a number of points that if you're a senior administrator or if you're a senior policy person, there's some really good questions here to get you thinking in the shower of a morning. That's something that you and I will probably keep thinking about and will raise from time to time as to how we address these things. If we think about the new Colombo plan, obviously they're going for longer, more immersive programs rather than shorter ones. Seems to be the trend, which again on a learning platform is a really, really good thing. The point made by many people in the sector was going longer will exclude some of these people that come from low socioeconomic or, bands that are closer to that low socioeconomic. And it's a really valid point. So this research, I think, is a really good this story, should I say, from Brad is a really good one for us to start just to stop and pause and think a little bit more deeply about these things. Think about, what are we trying to achieve? Is it higher participation? Is it deeper learning? And how do we go about that? And how do we service a new generation of students who have different demands to what they may have had 10 or 15 years ago?
All good points. I've certainly been seeing that, actually, thinking about it from my perspective, because I talk to a lot of universities in the learning abroad space on an ongoing basis, thinking about that kind of 10-year experience level, number of people who've been in the industry for a long time. And one of the things I'm hearing from a lot of institutions right now is just how hard it is to reach students from a marketing point of view, just to get the idea of studying abroad in front of them. Some of the mechanisms for reaching students haven't changed since I was a coalface practitioner at Macquarie Uni back in the early 2000s. And yet the way that that generation consumes information has completely changed. And yet at the same time, some of those channels, social media, very congested, very hard to get cut through. So what's the right answer? I've been doing some interesting work in that space. And actually, just speak to that real quick. On the 16th and 17th of April, so that's in about 6 weeks from by the time you're listening to this, I'm going to be running just some brainstorming sessions with learning abroad practitioners from around the country, looking at a range of different issues: New Colombo Plan, risk management of exchanges, short programs, and there's one other. We're just going to be doing some digital sessions, no cost involved, literally just a sort of best practice sharing experience. So keep an eye out for that if you are in the learning abroad space, and there'll be registration details coming your way very soon. Once again, no cost, but it's just a chance for us to get updated on some of these things. I think that's about it, isn't it, mate? Anything else that we need to chat about today?
I don't think so. I think we've covered that off well, Rob.
Feels like the year is well and truly underway. I've been out on campuses over the last couple of weeks in Sydney and Brisbane and other places, down to Adelaide soon. It's that great time of year, Dirk, when campuses come alive. New students are out and about, places are buzzing, and it's just a great time to be in international ed.
Couldn't agree more. I always have said orientation and graduations are the two favourite parts of the year.
So if you're out there on campuses, enjoy it, and we'll see you in the next episode of Global Horizons. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rob.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.